Good morning, guys. I'll get to the point right away. I'm retiring for good. I know the process was a pretty big deal last time, so when I woke up this morning, I figured I'd just press record and let you guys know first. So it won't be long-winded. You only get one super emotional retirement essay, and I used mine up last year. So really thank you guys so much, to every single one of you, for supporting me, my family, my friends, my teammates, my competitors. I could go on forever. There's too many. Thank you guys for allowing me to live my absolute dream. I wouldn't change a thing. Love you.
Well, when I woke up this morning, even though it's 1 year to the day, February 1st, 2022, that Tom Brady retired the first time for all of 40 days. When I woke up this morning, I did not expect to get a Tom Brady retirement announcement. And I guess it says a lot about Tom Brady and how long he's played and how well he's played for this long, that it surprises me when a 45-year-old decides that he's had enough of playing pro football. So he said for good. This is not me being cynical. I'm just not so sure. Because again, even though he's been playing for 23 years and he's 45 years old, this feels rushed. And maybe I had just kind of gotten my mouth all ready for some orange juice or a Tom Brady sweepstakes of sorts, a flirtation at least with the 49ers or the Raiders, or maybe he goes back to the Bucks given the changes. I guess I wasn't ready. Who cares if I was ready? I mean, obviously it's his decision, but I was like, wait a second, this feels like it kind of came out of nowhere. And I wonder if he's emotional, if he's exhausted. He's clearly emotional in announcing his retirement, but is he just exhausted from a trying year on and off the field? He's played so well for so long and is still playing at a high level. I think I'm higher on his level of play than most people are. We'll get into that in a second. So it just doesn't feel like a guy who was clearly on the way out. His retirement a year ago this time was less surprising to me than this one, because it was like, well, last year, at least if you go based on some sort of script, some sort of movie script, not an 80 for Brady script, but a script nonetheless. Last year was like, well, he won the Super Bowl, came back to see if he could do it again, just to kind of, get out of his system, and then he's going to retire. This year, it's like, well, wait a second, man. I thought you were about to go see what else was out there, see if there was another opportunity for you, which maybe there wasn't, according to reports. So I would not be surprised. What I'm getting at is if we saw him again after the dust has settled and after he's had some time to process this. So I'm not holding him to the for good this time, even though he came off as sincere. Interested in the fallout when it comes to the teams that I mentioned in their quarterback situations. And also, listen, we've been talking about Brady's legacy and how great he is, even when he, in the middle of the season. We never missed an opportunity to talk about the greatness of Tom Brady, give him his flowers. But I've seen a lot of headlines, a lot of stories talking about the greatest player in NFL history. I've never been comfortable with that title, and I will get into that as well. Let's get into it with my guys. Mike Jones from The Athletic, Charles Robinson, of course, from Yahoo Sports. Good to see you, fellas. I know y'all are surprised to see me. When our producers booked you, you thought it was Michael Holley. I'm here on a Wednesday. I have not retired from this show. I'm not even part-time. I'm full-time still. So it's good to see you two fellas. Appreciate y'all coming through. All right, Charles, I know nothing should surprise us at this point. Nothing certainly surprises you. Did you have an inkling that this was coming? And what was this about? Was this simply he's just tired of playing football, or did this have more to do with the lack of options on the market? Because we know there had to be some conversations going on behind the scenes with other teams potentially.
Right. I think the process that was interesting over the last month is you felt like things whittled down. Like at first it was, what about Tennessee and Mike Vrabel and the relationship there? What's he going to do with Sean Payton? Potentially Sean Payton's next decision could impact him. What about the Miami Dolphins and Tua's health? It got to a point where I think if you really counted the number of teams that were speculatively tied to him, it was like a dozen. Now, realistically, it was maybe 4 or 5. But as time moved on, it really started to feel like it was going to be Tampa or retirement. We talked about this on Monday. It felt like it was going to be Tampa or retirement, or maybe a late sudden change with San Francisco because of the Brock Purdy injury. And what would the assessment be with Brock Purdy? If he had to have elbow surgery, was this going to be a 1-year layoff? We found out it's looking like potentially 6 months, which would put Brock Purdy possibly on track to be in camp and vying for the starting quarterback job for the 49ers. But there's no doubt in my mind, I did not expect this today. I would be lying if I said I expected this today. But I think for me, it definitely felt like the options began to shrink. As you heard, he wants to stay closer to Miami. He wants to be near his kids. And it would really have to be something wildly special for him to consider moving far away. And to me, the only thing that really fit was San Francisco.
Mike Jones, you think this is really it for real, for real? I mean, again, he seems sincere, but I mean, you know, stranger things have happened. You know, I mean, could things change? Could he change his mind? Or from what you're seeing and what you're hearing, is this really it for the GOAT?
I guess you never say never, right? But just everything, you know, as the reasons that Charles just listed right there, with seeming like options were drying up, with those options, limited options being moving farther away from his family, which is something that, you know, we've heard that he did not want. It does seem like this is it. There's a different tone in his words now than what they were last year, this time when he retired. You could always tell last year, it sounded like he was hanging up out of obligation more so than desire. There wasn't a feeling of peace in his words. You almost could sound like he was like, well, you know, I need to, it's time for me to be a dad now. You know, my family's given up a lot.
I'm being summoned. Yeah.
Right. But now you could, there was a tone of finality in his words and his expressions. Yeah. And I think that he looked at, you know, he needed this past year, which was tumultuous. It was frustrating. It was draining. And he probably like looked at, okay, what are the options? And do I really want to put myself through another year? Because there's no guarantee that you're going to get that storybook ending, which he said after the end when they lost in Tampa to Dallas. He's like, you know, yeah, you like the storybook ending, but you just don't get it. I think he realized, you know what?
Forever.
Yeah, you know, I don't want to put myself, you know, through this again.
But listen, and I'm not trying to keep him from retiring. I mean, we've had him for long enough, okay? Let the man have the rest of his life. But is there a chance that, you know, listen, he's still in phenomenal shape. Is there a chance, Charles, that he takes a year off and maybe and sees what the landscape is next year and comes back? Or is this just like, you know what, once he's out, no matter how good of shape he may keep himself in his mid to late 40s?
Well, I mean, like Mike Jones said, you know, those are Brady's words last year, never say never, right? And that's how we knew the door was open, and that's how it felt like, hey, this was already starting to reverse course. Do I think he could take a year off? Yeah. I mean, do I think he could take a month off and maybe feel differently? Remember, free agency still doesn't really open for 6 weeks. Yeah, I think that's possible. And to me, I think I'm with Mike Jones here. Like, this definitely felt like a different vibe watching that video. I was like, oh yeah, this kind of feels like it. Like this does not feel like an obligation retirement. This feels like an emotion. Like he's
it was his words, not in statement form. It was him on camera, as opposed to releasing some PR statement. Right. So it's definitely hit differently.
Yeah, and there was some simplicity to it, and just sort of like, hey, I already did the big emotional thing a year ago. Like, I'm not going to do that again. Yeah. It felt like there's some finality in his mind. Now, that said, Tom Brady is a competitor. I think if Tom Brady looks back at 2022, I think the feelings, and it'll be interesting because I think someday he will end up talking about this, whether he comes back or not. But I think that there may be this lingering feeling that, you know what, 2022, in a way, I don't want to say it was stolen from him, but he went through so many things privately, and which were not private at all. They were on Page 6 every day. We talked about it constantly. Obviously, his divorce, the FTX stuff that he went through during the course of this season, obviously the injuries on the football field. I don't think there's any way Tom Brady gets away from this, whether he comes back or not, and doesn't look back at 2022 and say, you know what, I feel like all these other things took away what could have been at least a more normal ending for me. I never got that normal end.
And that's why, even though he's won 7 Super Bowls and has all the records, it feels like there could be unfinished business for him. Or maybe I'm just projecting. Maybe as I approach my mid-40s and I can't make up my mind what I want to do from day to day, maybe I'm just thinking that everybody's like that. Mike Jones, though, I guess what I'm getting at, though, is the market or potentially the lack thereof for Tom Brady because, and I'm going to go to Mike first, Charles, and then come back to you because you could tell me you told me so. But Tom Brady, speaking of his words, I think he once said, I'll retire when I suck. Now, I don't think anybody would go so far as to say he sucks. But Charles and I, Mike, we went at it a couple of weeks ago about just how good Tom Brady still is. Could this be a realization, Mike, on the part of Tom Brady, or is the lack of a market for his services a reflection of the fact that Brady, relatively speaking, has significantly declined?
What we don't know is how difficult, how much of a struggle internally it is to get himself ready again, back to top form. You can look at these, you look at the opportunities, and there are a few of them that you feel like, hey, you plug him in at San Francisco and they're contending for a Super Bowl, or, he can make the Raiders or the Jets, a playoff team, you feel like that. But we don't know, like arm strength and some of these, physical things, mental things. Was it draining for him? Was it a chore? Did he feel like, I don't suck right now, but one more year, a little bit decline, the sucking might start coming. That's something that I would love to hear from him. And maybe in a few months, he'll be on there with Jim Gray and he'll be like, yeah, man, like my body felt in a way that it never had. And my brain just wasn't, able to fire. I'm not sure. I mean, because look, he still did finish top 3 in passing, number 1 in completions. He still, was able to execute and run this offense. If his offensive line had been better, if Mike Evans wouldn't drop so many passes, if his defense could have gotten a stop, who knows how things would have played. Yeah, exactly. So it's not like he didn't do enough to lead a team. And so it definitely wasn't sucking, but maybe part of him is just like, hey, I don't want to suck. And this was really hard. And that's why I feel like maybe I've given everything I can give.
Well, speaking of Jim Gray, we now know why he snapped, because he probably was, emotional about the thought of like, it's coming, I know what I'm going to do, but I ain't ready to talk about it. But Charles, again, you kept pointing out, he doesn't want to take hits. He's getting rid of the ball as soon as he can. I mean, is this reality setting in when it comes to Tom Brady, that even though people like me still try to keep him in the top 10 and think he's the most, was, as it were now, the most dangerous person with the ball in his hand late in the game, still has his play fallen off to where, as Mike said, he wants to avoid the cliff before he even gets to it?
Well, I mean, now we know why he had the fastest get it out time in football in terms of, ball into his hands out of the pocket. Jeff Darlington, obviously, who we all know, reported that he played this season down 15 pounds. Tom Brady's already a slender guy. You take another 15 pounds off him, I refuse to believe that does not affect his physique and his ability to recover, probably some strength issues along the way. There's a reason why he's not wanting to take the punishment. I still think, and Michael Smith, you talked about this, hey, if he had a running game, well, again, that is a function, and it's reasonable at 45. It would be reasonable at 46 next season. Again, it's about what is around him. Are they playing complementary football? What's the offensive line look like? Can they run it? What are the multitude of skill options around him? Who's willing to keep up with him mentally and focus from a focus standpoint? Who's willing to be yelled at by Tom Brady moving forward? All these different things, I think, become a function of whether he still fits inside that top 10. I think you take away things, he falls down that list. You add things, he climbs up the list. But I will say this, that 15 pounds, I did not know that. I knew he was thin. I knew he had clearly lost weight. We had all sort of talked about that. I did not know it was 15 pounds. And to me, you put those 15 pounds back on Tom Brady through an offseason that doesn't involve the kind of stress of the last 12 months. I think potentially his game on the field could be affected a little bit more in a positive way than I thought.
Last thing I got for you guys. So where do the other teams go from here? Because, again, we had, I think you mentioned, Charles, we were listing teams that could potentially use his services even if for a year. San Francisco, given the injury/recovery situations they have with their two young quarterbacks, or even the Raiders, if not the Bucks. So, Mike, are we looking at the Jarrett Stidham era in Vegas, the Kyle Trask era in Tampa, and who knows who's available? Maybe it's Trey Lance before Brock Purdy in San Francisco. Where do these teams go from here since they're not turning to Tom Brady? Mike?
Well, I've heard that the Bucks, if Brady was going to leave, the Bucks plan to be aggressive and go after a veteran guy. And one person said, hey, Derek Carr could be an option for them there because he's a veteran guy, played at a high level, even though he didn't have, the greatest situation around him. And maybe they can continue to try to retool and not have a drop off starting back over at quarterback. I think that then, it becomes more interesting what happens with Aaron Rodgers as well. Because, all right, if you're not going to be in on Brady, then, okay, are the Raiders a team that goes after Rodgers? Could San Francisco, if there's a lot of questions about Trey Lance, and even though, hey, he was injured, but their feelings for some reason have changed a bit, about them in there. So, is that somewhere he could go? I don't know. But I think that those veteran guys will first be up for these teams like the Jets and the Bucks and the Raiders and the 49ers, rather than, sticking with the backups they have there and drafting.
Charles, what's your read on where these teams go now that Brady is gone to the retirement home?
I think Mike Jones is on it when it comes to Tampa. I think Derek Carr is somebody that I will see get connected there. But I don't think Tampa will be the only team interested in Derek Carr. I think for the Raiders, now you're sitting there staring at the draft and saying, well, look, if it's, is Stidham a bridge? And what is the draft talent? Will Levis, C.J. Stroud, what happens with Bryce Young, Anthony Richardson out of Florida? There's going to be, some quarterbacks that I think get pushed up the draft board as some of these teams that could potentially have been on Brady. Indianapolis is a team that could have been in on Brady. Obviously, we talked about the Raiders. All those teams, I think, are now going to start to bunch up at the top of the draft because they know, hey, there's not this bridge situation where we have one flourish, one shot in 2023 if we were to take a swipe at Tom Brady. Rodgers, I think now, Brady's the first domino. Now it's Rodgers. What's going to happen with Rodgers? Does he stay in Green Bay? Is there any 1 in a million shot that Kyle Shanahan would still be interested in Aaron Rodgers in San Francisco? Doubtful, given the fact that they don't have a lot of draft assets at this point to move. But as Mike Jones said, I do think there's a change in the wind around Trey Lance. I don't think the belief in him, it's lacking a little bit there. I think the Jets and Aaron Rodgers, I'm telling you, I don't think that's necessarily dead either because of ownership. So it gets Brady out of the way, and I think it just focuses a handful of these teams that might have wanted some kind of an outside shot at him. But it definitely puts Tampa squarely in the middle of the Derek Carr market, which I think will matter to a couple of franchises.
Pro Bowler Derek Carr. Appreciate you guys' perspective, and appreciate you guys helping me process this. Sure, we'll be talking to y'all again very, very soon.
It was an honor to be on with you.
Yeah, on a Wednesday. Man, the rarities.
That's sad. That's sad. This is how far we've fallen when, y'all got to thank me for being on my own show. I appreciate it, though. I really do. All right, well, J.J. Watt has got some company in the good old retirement home. Shouting out Tom Brady, greatest of all time, no question, no debate. It's been an honor and a privilege. The newly retired group meets on the golf course every morning at 10 a.m. Drinks are on the new guy, so bring your wallet. That's good stuff right there. And as we are joined now by my good friend, Shalise Manza-Young from Yahoo, one of the best columnists in the country. Jim Trotter, also one of the best columnists and reporters in the country, but your regular host on Brother from Another. He needs no introduction at this point. I need the introduction more than Jim Trotter does from NFL Media. Jim, and Shalise, it's a full circle moment for us. Both of us were on the front row of those Patriot press conferences back in the day, in the early days of the dynasty. But Jim, historian that you are, I want to ask you something. I've never, and both of you really, but Jim, start with you. I've never felt comfortable with, and Michael and I have gone back and forth, Michael Holly and I have gone back and forth on this for a long time, with Tom Brady as greatest player in NFL history. Greatest quarterback, greatest player at the game's most important position. But I refuse to say that Tom Brady was a better football player than Jerry Rice, a better football player than Lawrence Taylor, a better football player than Reggie White, a better football player than Jim Brown, who I wasn't old enough to watch live, but you get what I'm saying. Is he the best player regardless of position in your mind? But or with me that you got to qualify it?
Well, it depends on what your definition of greatest player is. So how do you define it? Because you can take it any direction you want to take it. I would say he is the greatest football player I've ever seen simply because of his dominance at one position and the most important position on the field. Okay. Look, I'm a San Francisco native, born in San Francisco, and grew up watching the 49ers and Raiders, and said I would never say there was a quarterback greater than Joe Montana. And then Tom Brady came along, and I have to give Tom Brady his flowers. He is the greatest quarterback that I've ever seen. I think for me as well, watching him leave New England and then to see what he did in Tampa after he left, because there was always that debate. Is it Brady, is it Belichick? Is it Brady, is it Belichick? And I'd always said it's both. But then to see him go on to Tampa and do what he did there in that first season. So I wouldn't have an argument with anyone saying he's the greatest football player ever. It just depends on what your definition of player is.
Yeah, and Shalise, I don't mind him being anointed as the greatest player ever. Certainly got a strong argument for it. Nobody's more accomplished. It's just hard for me to say that he's better than somebody was at their job that either redefined the position like a Lawrence Taylor did, or whose records will never be touched like a Jerry Rice did. It's just hard for me to do that, just given the specificity of those positions and how different their jobs were, Shalise.
Yeah, I think it's hard to compare. You know, it's a different skill set, but you're sort of maybe picking nits. I mean, when you think about the expectation that he had when he was chosen 199th overall, you think about he was the fourth quarterback on the depth chart at one point. Then he was a third quarterback, and what had to happen in order for him to get to play with the Drew Bledsoe injury, and then for him to take off the way he did. I think it's just really incredible. I think the unexpected nature of what we saw from him, you know, it really lends itself to the idea that he is the greatest ever, because he might have expected it once he was finally drafted, but nobody expected that, you know, we would be sitting here, you know, 23 years later and
quarter century later. Yeah, it's crazy.
You know, it's really incredible. It's weird to me, and I've said it a lot lately, is it almost feels like he's been so good for so long that we've almost lost sight of how incredible it all really was. Yeah.
No, that's well said. I mean, listen, it wasn't bagging groceries, but there's not a more incredible story in NFL history than the rise and sustained excellence of Tom Brady. And you're right, nobody has done it better, longer. Nobody's done their job better for a longer period of time than Tom Brady. Yes, Jim.
I'll say this to you, Mike. You were saying that you don't see anyone ever breaking Jerry Rice's records. And I would push back on that a little bit from this standpoint. When I see the way the rules are going in the NFL today and the way that they're opening up passing games and whatnot, I would not be shocked. Mm-hmm. I would be less shocked if somebody broke Jerry Rice's records as opposed to somebody doing what Tom Brady has done. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. When you win 7 championships.
Oh, forget the championships. Oh, the championship. Oh, that ain't happening again.
Right.
That ain't happening
again.
Right. Yeah. No, I'm with you on that. And the other part too.
Yeah.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. I was thinking of Jim Brown as well, with what he did. You know, played 9 seasons, had 8 rushing titles in 9 seasons. You know, things like that. So there are some records that that record I cannot see anyone breaking. But Jerry Rice's, I would not be shocked if someone did, based on how the game is going.
No, that's fair. That's absolutely fair. The longevity is Brady's got that, on his side more than anybody. No, I was just gonna say, he reinvented himself. Shalise and I, we covered Tom Brady. Think about what he was in 01, 02, 03, 04, 05. What he then became, in the middle of his career, toward the end of his career. He evolved as best he could for somebody who could never take part in the RPOs and the option football, but he evolved with the times and with the spread out offenses and just the high flying game, because early in his career he wasn't that guy. Want to pivot to head coaching developments. All that trouble in Miami, and he's not going to team up with Sean Payton, as it turns out. Sean Payton's new quarterback is Russell Wilson. Now that Denver has hired Sean Payton, I, for one, Shalise, think that Denver got Sean Payton for a bargain. I think a first-round pick this year and a second-round pick next year and $17 to $20 million, whatever it is, that's cheap for what Sean Payton is bringing to the Denver Broncos organization, and that's credibility. Like, you want to talk about head coaches and opposite Joes, they usually go opposite Joe. There's no more opposite Joes than getting Nathaniel Hackett, then going from Nathaniel Hackett to Sean Payton. That is quite the come-up, okay? And given what he should mean, if there's anything left in Russell Wilson, if anybody can pull it out, it's Sean Payton. So for an organization that needs stability, for the longest time they were looking for heir apparent to Peyton Manning. And before that it was heir apparent to John Elway. They needed a quarterback. They needed a head coach with stability and credibility and authority, maybe more than any other organization that's looking for a head coach, given what they invested in the quarterback position. To get Sean Payton, money well spent, if you ask me. In other words, you're worth what somebody's willing to pay for you, Shalise.
100%. If that's what the Broncos wanted to give up, and he was the one, although there seemed like there were conflicting reports yesterday that DeMeco Ryans was really their first choice, and that's a lot to give up if at the end of the day Sean Payton was really your second choice. Let's not forget, too, just because I would love to shade the Miami Dolphins for this, is the Miami Dolphins also sacrificed the first-round pick for Sean Payton that they never got Sean. But right. It is what it is. This idea that, coaches step away, he took a year off, and then he comes back for this feeding frenzy. Sean Payton's a good coach. I'm not like the biggest Sean Payton fan, so it's hard for me to get really excited.
They look better when they go into television. You know that.
They all look better.
The record looks a lot better.
At least he only played it out for 1 year and didn't do the John Gruden, keep parlaying it into more and more money out of the broadcast contract or whatever.
Right.
But if he, like you said, it's credibility. He has the name. He has one Super Bowl to his resume. So it certainly, I assume Denver fans are happier, particularly after what happened with Nathaniel Hackett. But I don't know. I'm not all that. I guess I'm kind of lukewarm on it. I don't know how you feel, Jim.
Look, I am a Sean Payton fan, and I agree with Mike that I think that if any coach can bring something out of Russell Wilson, it's Sean. Think about this in New Orleans. When Drew Brees went down 1 year, they had to turn to Teddy Bridgewater. Teddy Bridgewater went 5-0 under Sean. And I'll never forget, I was at the first game Teddy played as a starter then. And Sean came into the post-game press conference. Ironically enough, it was after they beat Seattle. And Sean seemed down, after a victory. And when I talked to him later about it, what he said was, I didn't do a good enough job adjusting my play calling to the player that I had taking snaps. And what that told me is that he was not one of these coaches who was going to say, you run my system or no system or you don't play. And so he adjusted, and he adjusted to the things that Teddy did well. Go to the next year when Drew is down again and Taysom Hill has to come in. What does Sean do? He adjusts his offense to the things that Taysom Hill does well. And Taysom, I believe, ends up going either 3-1 or 4-1 as the starter during that stretch. So I believe that Sean will do the same thing with Russell Wilson with whatever Russell Wilson has left. Russell was never a good fit with Nathaniel Hackett. Hackett is a timing offense. Russell is not a timing quarterback. And so I do believe that Sean Payton will get the most out of Russell Wilson, whatever is there. But I believe what Mike said is true too. You needed credibility, and you needed someone who could build for the long term. And I believe that that's what Denver has. And let's not forget this. We can talk about him being in the broadcast booth, but that broadcast booth was not paying him what the new ownership in Denver is going to pay Sean Payton. So Sean can rest. He can rest well on his wallet as he goes forward.
Credibility and long term. That brings me to the Houston Texans. Credibility is not a phrase often associated with that franchise, especially what they've done with David Culley and Lovie Smith the last couple of years. But sometimes you're just blessed. And, you know, they are blessed now with maybe the hottest coaching prospect. Sean Payton might have been the biggest, most established name. But to get DeMeco Ryans, who, from what I understand, was always going to be selective about whether or not he took a job. He was not going to, like, run to the first job that was there. Open to him. He wanted to make sure that there was an infrastructure in place there where he could be successful and you know, both on and off the field. For him to go home to Houston, it's like me and my wife, Jim, and I'm sure you can say the same. Like, the Texans outkicked their coverage, getting their former second-round pick to come back, and same as Shalise's husband did. Outkicked his coverage to get him to come back home and be the head coach of this organization. I mean, they couldn't ask for a bigger come-up than getting DeMeco Ryans to come from San Francisco. Got the 6-year deal. Hopefully they will stick with him much longer than they did the last two guys. But, I mean, you talk about incredible stories, Shalise. They could not have done better. We'll see what they end up doing at the quarterback position. But an organization that seemingly has been a laughing stock gets some serious credibility in, wait for it, a leader of men in DeMeco Ryans, who they know very well.
I think the biggest thing, like you said, is how long are they going to stick with him? You know, I just really, really, really hope that they give him time to turn around. They're hard to trust,
aren't they?
They really are. And how many times have we seen it, particularly with Black coaches, that if it goes bad for him there, it's going to be tied to him and it's going to hurt him. And I think that's the biggest thing for me, that when I heard, you know, when the reports came out that he was their number one pick, and that, you know, they really wanted to bring him back to the franchise, that's all well and good. But, you know, the last few years have shown that you just cannot trust. You can't trust the NFL in general, but you really can't trust the Houston Texans. And I just fear for him. I don't know DeMeco. I don't know anything really that much about him or anything like that, other than what, you know, has been reported. But I just fear for him that he doesn't become another, you know, they give him 3 years because the Texans are what the Texans are. They don't really have a quarterback right now. We all know how critical a quarterback is to success in this league. And if he's not able to, you know, have whatever they deem as the success, is he going to be branded with that? And it affects him long term. I mean, Raheem Morris is still waiting for another chance to become a head coach. And Josh McDaniels is on his third chance to be a head coach. They were rookie head coaches the same year. Josh was fired after a year and a half. Raheem was fired after 3, and Raheem still doesn't have another job. So, you know, we all know that it's just the unfairness of it all. So I am wishing him the very, very, very best. I hope Nick Caserio can find a quarterback.
Ain't no way Nick getting another coach to fire, Jim. I mean, if it doesn't go well, Nick got to be the first one to go, right, Jim?
No, we're talking about Cal McNair as ownership. So
that's true. We're not talking logic here.
Yeah. But let me say this to you about DeMeco Ryans, Mike. You are absolutely right. And I know DeMeco, and we've talked over the last couple of weeks, and we've talked about Houston as well without divulging too much. And the one thing he was never going to do was simply take a job to have a job. And that goes back to last year with Minnesota, where he could have had Viking job. And he pulled out after the first interview. Why? Because it didn't fit for him at that time, particularly with his family situation. And to me, that's a man of character to be able to say, you know what? My dream is to be an NFL head coach, but my family is more important than all of this. And so he stayed behind for another year in San Francisco, knowing that other opportunities would come along. Now, in terms of Houston, you know, again, without divulging too much, I said point blank to DeMeco, you got to be careful about this ownership. and this front office group. And DeMeco said, I'm aware of everything. And from that standpoint, I don't know what the conversations were between him and the organization, but I can guarantee you that he has some assurances. And I would assume they were in writing. I'm making a big assumption here. Yeah. I would assume they were in writing that he is going to get the time to do it right. And look, if we're being honest here and we set aside ownership, which is a really big ask, I understand. But if we set aside ownership and we just look at the situation with the Houston Texans, it's a nice situation from this standpoint. You've got the number 2 pick in the draft, which means if you like these quarterbacks, you can go get one. You've got at least 11 draft picks, and I think you have the 4th most or 5th most dollars under the salary cap to do something. So
with no state tax,
Ryans
right?
is going.
Ain't no way to go but up.
He's going to have an opportunity to build this in the vision that he has for how to build a program, and he is an intelligent coach.
Oh my goodness,
intelligent man, and he is a leader of men. So
I'm so glad you said that, because black coaches. Black coaches like, oh, he's a leader of men, which is a compliment, and that's important as a head coach. He's a leader of men. He relates to the players. This dude is a genius. This dude is a savant, a football savant, and not enough black coaches. It just, I guess it doesn't come organically to the conversation around black coaches. I talked about this last year with the Bieniemys of the world and the Leftwiches of the world. It's like they're X's and O's geniuses, strategic geniuses, all the same. Speaking of which, that leads me perfectly into the last topic I want to get to you guys, which is a whole show in and of itself. And that's something that is significant, but it's no longer novel. And it's becoming so normal until it's like, there are 2 black quarterbacks in the Super Bowl for the first time. But that milestone didn't register with me immediately for a couple of reasons. One, Patrick Mahomes is now a regular in the Super Bowl. This is his 3rd time in 4 years. They've been in 5 straight AFC Championship games. And Jalen Hurts' Philadelphia Eagles have been the best team in the league all year. And so when it was official that they were both in it, I was looking at it strictly from a football standpoint. It's like, they belong here. And that to me, and Shalise, you wrote a fantastic column on Yahoo as always today. And the line I wanted to point out was when you said, progress does not come easily or even quickly to the NFL, but this is a sign of progress. And the way it's so progressive for me is in the fact that for the first time, because Lamar Jackson's been an MVP, Steve McNair was a co-MVP, Cam Newton was an MVP. But for the first time that I can recall, the best quarterback in the NFL is a black quarterback. A lot of the better quarterbacks in the NFL are black quarterbacks. The game is being played in such a way that is often associated with black quarterbacks. In other words, even the white quarterbacks are playing the way that black quarterbacks were made to move to a different position because they played that way. For all those reasons, it feels like we're getting to a point where we no longer have to distinguish anymore between black and white. People always say, well, when are we going to get to a point where it's just quarterbacks? Which is we're waiting on to get to that point where it's head coach. When is it going to get to a point where it's just quarterbacks? Well, we might be at that point when there are so many black quarterbacks and those black quarterbacks are dominating. Now, so I don't see this Super Bowl, Shalise, as a watershed moment that's necessarily going to open doors, because that door is already so wide open. Are there going to be double standards? Is there going to be coded language around quarterbacks? Of course. It's black people. It's America. Ain't nothing changed that much. I'm not that naive. But the progress to me is where it's like, not only are these guys there, they belong there. Hell, with Jalen Hurts, the Eagles have built their entire offense to suit his skill set, as opposed to once upon a time, you had to fit your square peg of your talents into a white coach's round hole, Shalise.
No, and I think that seems like that's the progress, is more that coaches came around to the idea that, oh, my quarterback doesn't have to be a 6'4" white guy who, is as mobile as the statue across the street in the park, that being able to move, that being able to be a multiple threat, it helps when you're going up against defenses. If they don't know, if they can't be sure, well, the quarterback's never going to move, so we only have to account for the running backs and the receivers or whoever, there's another element now that you have to be aware of. We saw it in the AFC Championship game. What is the signature play from the AFC Championship game? It was the one time that Patrick Mahomes needed to use his legs, and he did to great effect. And it wasn't too long ago that, we just never saw those things. And I think, we all know Jason Reed, and he wrote a book last year about this too. It's been fits and starts, that there was for so long this idea that black men weren't smart enough to be quarterbacks, and also black men weren't good leaders and those sorts of things. And you had to get past that and then stop pigeonholing them that, well, yeah, we see that you're fast and we see that you played quarterback well in college, but you can't do that in the NFL. It's been a progress. And I do think, and it's interesting because, Mahomes and Hurts, they're not really that similar in terms of quarterbacks. For so long we thought black quarterbacks had to do a certain, play a certain way, and they don't really play that way. And it's been an evolution. I think it's just been the time of coaches getting rid of those coaches who are so wedded to quarterbacks are just this way, and embracing the idea that success is success. And if it helps us get first downs and get to the end zone, let's embrace it and make it work for us. I mean, that's what it's supposed to be about, right?
Yeah. I think this evolution was inevitable. I mean, if we're being honest here, because look, what's the feeder system to the NFL? It's the college game. And the college game for years has been transitioning to an RPO system primarily. And so from that standpoint, just from a survival standpoint at the NFL level, coaches were going to have to adjust. And so I think that this matchup, or a matchup of these type quarterbacks, was inevitable. And look, we can talk about the timeline here, Mike, as Shalise talked about in terms of the starts and stops. You go back to, I got some numbers here. It was 1969 that Shaq Harris was the first African-American quarterback to start a season opener, right? The next year, or you go to 79, Doug Williams plays Vince Evans in week 5 of the season. That was the first time we had two black quarterbacks, starting quarterbacks, face off in a game. Then you go to, what was it? We had, I'm trying to look at my numbers here, 78 Doug's drafted in the first round, right? Over the next 20 drafts, there were only 2 black quarterbacks drafted in the first round after Doug was taken. So it's a slow process in terms of that and the mindset in the NFL changing. But in terms of this evolution to the quarterbacks who are playing today, the league had no choice but to change, or else it was not going to have people who could play the quarterback position based on the feeder system that was coming from the college game.
No, that's well said. And then speaking of coming from the college game, Bryce Young and C.J. Stroud, first 2 picks, and for that matter, Anthony Richardson, maybe the first 3 quarterbacks, or at least 3 of the first 4 could end up being black quarterbacks. Y'all are always first.
No, you know,
me.
We
appreciate y'all blessing the show.
You know that's not gonna happen.
They gonna prop up Will Levis? Okay. You know what?
Somebody will. Somebody will.
let me just dream. Let me dream that Bryce Young and C.J. Stroud gonna be first. We appreciate y'all, man. I love y'all. Thank you so much. $28, 10, and 11 against the Knicks for LeBron last night. I mean, listen, we have a lot of GOAT conversation. Let's keep the GOAT talk going and pivot from Brady to LeBron James. First triple-double of his 20th season, making LeBron the first player ever with a triple-double in his 20th season, averaging over 30 a game. Of course, last night, and scoring ain't the best thing he does. We know that. That's past. Last night, he moves into 4th place all-time on the assist list, passing Nash and Mark Jackson, now trailing only Stockton, Kidd, and CP3. He's the only non-point guard in the top 20. And of course, he trails Kareem Abdul-Jabbar by 89 points for the all-time scoring record. Marcus Thompson from The Athletic is here. No last name, Nat is here. Marcus, I don't know if we've ever actually had this conversation, man, because it's like, I'm one of those people that, like, Michael Jordan's the GOAT, full stop. I don't know if there was anything LeBron could ever do to make me change my mind. And I'm not saying I'm changing my mind, because him climbing these leaderboards was inevitable. We knew he was going to pass Kareem someday if he kept up his play. We knew this moment was coming. We knew he'd keep climbing up the assist ladder. But watching it happen, though, I wonder. I've never had this conversation with you. I don't know where you stand on the GOAT conversation. Is it Jordan, and is it LeBron? And if it's Jordan, is what LeBron is doing making you reconsider it?
It's Jordan. What LeBron is doing is not making me reconsider, because LeBron is not doing this while I was 14 years old. And that's what matters. This is all about
Perfect.
This is all about, like, when I was impressionable, when I was at home watching, like, where to come fly with me VHS is for LeBron. That's not my experience, right? I didn't have that. I didn't get robbed for LeBrons at the Coliseum BART station in East Oakland. I got robbed for Jordans, right?
Say that. So, speak on it. Speak on it.
To me, this is a conversation about adolescence and about, like, who grabs you when you are most impressionable. So I understand why people who are 15 right now, I understand. Like, I thought my parents were crazy. My daddy was crazy talking about Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Man, shut up. That's what I was thinking. Are you watching Jordan? But they felt the same way about the dude who was good when they were 13. So to me, there's nothing LeBron could do. I'm old, and he just caught me at a bad time in my life.
That's so well put. That's why you're the best in the game. Because the irony, I guess, and it's fitting, I don't know if it's irony, it's fitting that he's going to pass Kareem, who, even though there are so many people who say Kareem gets left out the GOAT conversation, so therefore he's not getting left out of the GOAT conversation, Kareem still has a rightful argument to be the greatest basketball player of all time. But Nat, as much as we talk, and we talk all the time, I don't know where you stand. Now, for all I know, you may say it's Steph Curry.
You do.
But I don't know where you stand on the greatest player of all time. Because she's so young. Nat's so young. Like, she wasn't even old enough to watch Michael Jordan. She ain't never heard of Magic Johnson.
I think she was born in 2015. I think she was born like,
you understand what I'm saying?
MVP, yeah.
So I don't know where she stands on this. And Nat, it's not that LeBron is a better player now than he ever was. It stands to reason. Like, well, why would LeBron be considered the GOAT now versus the rest of his career? Because it's like, he was always great. He's just now putting the crown jewel in the king's crown. So where do you stand? Is it Jordan for you? Is it Curry? I don't know. Or somebody else, or Magic, or Kareem? And is what LeBron is doing right now in his 20th season, is it making you rethink your greatest of all time ranking?
No, not even a little bit. Michael Jordan is the GOAT. And I want to be clear that I actually wasn't a Michael Jordan fan growing up. I didn't like him because Magic Johnson was my favorite player when I was younger. And when they beat the Lakers, from that point on, I hated Michael Jordan and the Bulls. So just like I'm not a huge LeBron fan, I also wasn't a Jordan fan, because I know everyone would be like, oh, you're a LeBron hater. But Michael Jordan is the GOAT. There was a time that I came around to accepting that, and there's nothing he can do. I mean, I think LeBron's GOAT case is flawed anyway. For me, it's Jordan or LeBron. Like, I never liked that he was automatically elevated to top two, and that the conversation is always framed around those two. The argument for him is largely, and he's a great player. He's an incredible player. He's an all-time great. So I'm not disputing that. But a lot of it is about these counting stats that he's built up over a long, long, long period of time.
Longevity.
Yes, it's based on longevity. And I don't see why it's greater to take longer to do something. I don't see how that's greater than doing it in a shorter period of time and amassing it. So it's
kind of
great.
like a life lesson.
Yes,
why
I mean,
is it greater to take longer to do something?
Yeah, it's great that he's achieved all these things. It's incredible. And that he's still playing at such a high level. And so I think that's something we can applaud. But, like, why does it matter if his team has no chance of even competing for a championship? That's not relevant to me. That's just great. But yeah, no, you're not going to be the GOAT for that.
No, that's
Hey, Mike, I'm gonna try to use that on my wife. I'm gonna be like, man, I gave you 10 good years. Why I gotta do 20? I showed you the peak of my game the first 10. You know what I'm saying? Thanks, Natalie.
Right. I tried to settle this with a while back. I don't know if I told y'all this. I told it to Michael. It's Prince and Stevie Wonder for me. Like, if you do think LeBron is the greatest, I'm not going to fight you over that. You know what I'm saying? But I'll just disagree. Speaking of a rare air, I'd love to get y'all take on Nikola Jokic, averaging a triple-double, 26, 18, and 15 last night. Now, this might sound crazy after Joel Embiid just gave him the business. But Marcus, Are the voters going to give him a third straight MVP, which is like Larry Bird, Bill Russell territory? Is that what we're looking at with Jokic? Or is the fatigue going to be real and Embiid's going to finally get his this year? Or is it somebody else?
The fact that I don't know the answer to that is wild to me, because when it was Giannis, he had no shot on the third. It was like, yeah, nah, we're not voting for you, man. Like, you need to show me something in the playoffs. But Jokic, he just has this dude has a spell on people. Like, the way he plays, who he is, how he plays.
Nat rolled their eyes.
The efficiency, like he does. People just love, like, him and his story. I think he could win. I think at some point, like, people like Natalie will force other people to rethink, right, and say, hold on, are you just giving it to him? But I think generally MVP is settled way too early, and people have already made up their minds. So, yeah, I do think it's possible. I don't think that means he will win. I do think how the season finishes, people will have to find a reason not to give it to him, and Jason Tatum might give it to him, might give him a reason not to vote for Jokic. But it's just weird to me that a guy who can't get to the Western Conference Finals is just anointed. I just never seen that before. It was
Marcus,
just like, yo, man.
in the bubble. He did.
Well,
did.
There's sarcasm there. They're saying eye roll. But I mean, but now, Natalie, he got the thing that he never had, which is he got the top team in the West. So it's even more of an argument on his behalf now, Natalie. There's the eye roll again. You're not feeling this guy.
No, because so now he won MVP because he did the most with least. And now he has a team and they're in the number one position, and now they want to give him MVP again. It's bizarre. And I agree that with Giannis, you knew it was real. He wasn't getting a third. You always know the voter fatigue, but there's a really strong push to give it to him. And I personally, and people think that I don't like Jokic, which is crazy because I converted so many people into Jokic fans. But I think it's insanity to give someone a third MVP who has yet to even appear in the NBA Finals, much more win one. It is very rarefied company. And all those guys have rings. They have a chip. It doesn't sit well with me. And I do think that there are other candidates who meet the criteria that we've always traditionally used, who are just not really being given the right consideration. Jason Tatum, Embiid, and it's just like this push to give it to Jokic, or a desire to give it to Luka, but he just doesn't have the record.
Well, they're plus 20 points per 100 possessions when he's on the floor and -8 when he's off. So analytics loves him. I know you hate that. Listen,
analytics
we are better.
Steph too, but they don't give him the award for it. Am I
there
lying,
we go.
Marcus?
There's a Steph reference.
No, but am I lying, Marcus?
We are better when y'all are on the show.
Yeah. The very reasons you might give Jokic the award, then you could definitely make the case for Steph. So Steph should have about 4 MVPs, if that was the thing. But when he had a squad, it was like he's got too many players.
Y'all are the real MVPs. Y'all the real MVPs. Do people say that anymore, or is that played out? You can't use that no more, Natalie?
It's done.
Y'all the real MVP?
It's over.
Hey, thank you for watching Brother from Another. If you haven't hit that subscribe button, go ahead and do that now. Don't forget, you can catch us 3 to 4 weekdays on PeacockTV.com and on Sirius XM Channel 85.